What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We've got a great episode lined up for you today. Our final episode of Next Pats before night one of the 2025 NFL Draft. It's all come down to this, friends. This is why you lift all them weights, as Bill Parcells told the New York Giants on the sidelines back in the day. This is why we do all that research. This is why we make all those phone calls. This is why we write all those articles for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, so we can see, as Patriots followers, how Mike Vrabel, how this front office are going to improve this team moving forward. The draft wasn't always so important here in New England, but these last several years, it has been. And we have seen firsthand how a draft, good or bad, how draft picks, good or bad, can impact this team on the field in a very real way in a post-Tom Brady era. It matters. It matters more than ever. And I would say right now, could you call it the most important draft of the last several years? No, that was last year. That was last year when the Patriots had to get it right with Drake May, and it looks like they have a chance to do so, right? Of course, I would argue that they did the right thing and that they got the right guy, and to me, he looks like the guy for the long-term future. But now you have to get to work surrounding him because you haven't done enough. You didn't do enough last offseason, and to this point, this offseason, you still haven't done enough on the offensive line, in that receiver room, and that to me has to be the primary focus, the primary takeaway about this year's draft class when everything is said and done by the time we get to Saturday night. So, what are we going to do here in this final episode before we get to the draft? Number one, we're going to talk about some of my favorite players, some of my best fits for the Patriots at a couple premium positions. We're going to talk about receiver. We're going to talk about the edge as well. We're going to direct you at NBCSportsBoston.com, as we always do, so that you can read about even more players than the ones we list here today. But we're also bringing in our good friend Albert Breer from Sports Illustrated. We do it every time during draft week, right before the draft, so that he can empty the notebook, so to speak. Lots of knowledge swimming around in that cranium of Albert Breer's. And so he's going to lay it on us here in person in the Next Pat Studios here in the Boston Media Center. We have a great time talking about not only Will Campbell and some of these other tackle prospects that the Patriots could be interested in. Not only are we going to talk about potential trade down opportunities for the Patriots and the surprise name that is generating trade up conversation in the NFL this week, but we're going to talk about some day two names as well. And we're going to focus specifically on the pass catchers and who the Patriots might be looking at to provide Drake May even a little bit more help offensively. But first, let's talk about some of those pass catchers. And who, dear viewer, who, dear listener, will the Patriots be interested in when it comes to their favorite receivers in this year's draft class? Well, hopefully, you've already found on YouTube, on Instagram, on our social platforms, the videos that we were able to compile for our On the Clock series with Brian Hoyer. Tommy Carton and I had a chance to sit with Hoyer in the studio and dissect tape. We had a fantastic time talking about primarily day two wideouts, but we actually started with a day one guy in Travis Hunter, who obviously seems as though is not going to be available to the Patriots at number 4 overall. We talked some Tet McMillan, T-Mac, Tetaroa, and whether or not he would actually be a fit for the Patriots. Hoyer says no. And then we veered into some later in the draft options that do seem like better fits for New England and specifically for Josh McDaniels. And who has a better idea of what Josh McDaniels would like than Brian Hoyer, given all the time that he spent in that Josh McDaniels offense, not only here in New England, but also out in Las Vegas. And we talk about Emeka Egbuka, just your all-around, versatile, tough, willing to do the dirty work, great hands, ultra competitive, ultra productive at a very high level in the Big Ten, playing alongside some amazing receivers and actually setting the career receptions mark for Ohio State during his time at the school. And sure, maybe he was there a little longer than some others, but you're playing alongside Marvin Harrison Jr., you're playing alongside Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and Jeremiah Smith. There's targets going all sorts of different directions at Ohio State. And this guy tops them all in terms of career receptions. Pretty impressive. That's a name that we should be considering. Maybe it's even via a trade up. Would that be worth their while? Or is it one of the Iowa State receivers, Jaden Higgins, 6'4", 215 pounds, ran a 4.47, only 2 drops last year, a less than 2% drop rate, only 3 drops on 210 total targets. Former basketball player. Excellent hands, good enough size to win on the outside, but versatile as well. We've seen him play on the interior. To me, that versatility, that willingness to play in a variety of different spots, the coaching that you get under Matt Campbell at Iowa State and what he's done offensively, obviously Brock Purdy, Breece Hall, another name of note to come from that program. These guys pretty much ready to go right out the chutes when they leave that Cyclones program. Will Jaden Higgins be the same way? How about Jalen Knoll, his teammate? Smaller package, all kinds of speed, all kinds of juice. And if that's what they are prioritizing at that position in terms of adding to Drake May, maybe he's the best option. Can give you something after the catch, although I know I've spoken to coaches, spoke to an offensive coordinator last week about Jalen Knoll. They'd love to see just a little bit more from Knoll after the catch in terms of his creativity, in terms of his ability to break tackles. But this guy is a very successful punt returner. He was co-special teams player of the year in the Big 12 to go along with that explosive ability that he gave Iowa State. You can play him on the outside. You can run him deep from the slot. 4.39 speed, 41-inch vertical. Explosive, fun to watch player, and somebody who I think is really productive, and somebody that I think could be worthy of the number 38 overall pick. He ain't going that highly in mock drafts, but it wouldn't stun me if either he or Higgins is the choice at 38 overall. So those are 2 excellent fits to me. Emeka Egbuka, an excellent fit to me as well. One name that you're going to hear Albert Breer bring up, Kyle Williams, an excellent fit as well. He goes to the Senior Bowl and he puts on a route running clinic, doing things that he wasn't necessarily asked to do at Washington State, but clearly has the ability to do and could help make him a really effective player at the next level. There are options for the Patriots to give Drake May, to give them another weapon, put him alongside Stephon Diggs, put him alongside Kendrick Bourne, who has had success in this Josh McDaniels offense. If you want to continue to sprinkle in Pop Douglas in a certain kind of role, there's a little short to intermediate juice and separation skill there in the 6th-round pick from a couple years ago. All of a sudden, that receiver room looks very different than it did a year ago. And let's be clear, it's a receiver room in need of a lot of help. So, Higgins, Knoll, Emeka Egbuka, Kyle Williams, these to me are all names that are worthy of attention from New England. Some others that I personally appreciate, that I went ahead and did some digging on. Alec Eomanor from Stanford. I think a really solid day 2 pick. Now, are you going to take him at 38 overall? Probably not. But if you don't have your receiver by the 3rd round and he's available to you there, over 6 feet, over 200 pounds, really physical, the stride length, not ideal. I love that scouting term. I talk to scouts, I talk to evaluators, I talk to coaches, coordinators. This is one of the things they want to see from their wide receiver prospects, because this is what the best of the best are able to do in terms of being able to threaten defensive backs, getting them on their heels, getting up to and onto their toes, so to speak, and using that stride length out the gates to be able to threaten a defender, break off a route in a certain kind of way, and not telegraph what it is they've been asked to do. And actually, the player that I was told is a great example of having this really next level sort of stride is Stephon Diggs. When he was at his best, he could very quickly, in and out of his breaks, threaten you in one moment with a route over the top, with something vertical, something deep, and then in a very sudden manner, be able to break that off and run your comeback, run your curl, run your hitch, run your dig. So that to me is something to keep an eye on. You know, to me, Jalen Knoll, I think, does a pretty good job of that. I think Jaden Higgins does an okay job of that. Alec Aomanor, I know there are coaches who are hoping to see more in that regard from him. But physical, big hands, has had some drops issues. So something to keep in mind there. But if you're looking for a presence on the outside, the comp I was given for him is actually another Stanford receiver from a couple of years ago, Michael Wilson, who's a solid player, but he's probably a number 3, right? They've got Trey McBride there as a tight end, but he's really the go-to option. They have Marvin Harrison Jr. You get Alec Aomanor, he's not preventing you from looking for a number 1 down the line in all likelihood. But boy, he lit it up a couple years ago against Travis Hunter. So if you're valuing best on best, if you're valuing level of competition, that's a pretty good place to start right there with Alec Aomanor. Jack Betch, another player, not giving you high-end speed. He's not going to be a vertical threat in terms of getting on top of a defender and stacking him and beating him deep. But smart, tough, dependable, good hands. Can play him in a variety of different roles. He's going to give you something after the catch because he's hard to bring down. That's a guy that I could see fitting in Josh McDaniels' offense. It's just a question of, are you looking to get more explosive? Are you set on slow receivers? They're good on slow receivers, is what one scout told me earlier this week. And there's a point there, no doubt. Jack Betch didn't do himself any favors, didn't run a 40, right? So if people are looking at your tape and they are assuming you're slow, you're giving them confirmation by not running that 40. So I don't think that means he's off their board necessarily, or should be, but he's just not going to give you that element if that's what you're looking for. So there's a couple more quote-unquote fits, in my opinion. They landed on our best fits list on NBCSportsBoston.com. On the edge, Jalen Walker, polarizing player. I've had people, one defensive assistant tell me for him and for their team, he's more of a second-round option. He's 6'1", 243. He doesn't look like a full-time edge defender right now, and they don't view him as a full-time off-the-ball linebacker either. They like his bend. They like his burst at the line. He's a good, not great athlete in their opinion. He looks like, to them, somebody who runs 4.65, 4.7. And it's 6'1", 240. You'd love to see more speed there. You're going to hear Albert Breer in a little bit talk about Micah Parsons as we're talking about Jalen Walker. And maybe there's the plan for how to use somebody like Jalen Walker, who has spent so much time off the ball and has been used as a blitzer and can be used off the edge and can be used as a quarterback spy. There's a lot to his game to like. But if you're not high-end when it comes to the athleticism, and you're not high-end when it comes to the size and the frame and the length, that to me is a really hard sell in the top 5. Does he make sense for the Patriots? Yes, that's why he's on our best fits list. But is he the guy? Is he the person that you'd attack, especially when you have needs at other positions, especially when those other positions are even thinner than the edge position is in this year's class? You could get an edge player at 38 overall. You can. A productive one who's going to play a lot for you. I'm not sure you're going to be able to do that at tackle, for example. But Jalen Walker, A+ intangibles, across the board. Everything you hear about the guy is next level. Excellent, excellent, excellent. But it's the pass rush ability, which one linebackers coach told me, hey, that's his superpower. Let him do that. But if that's all he's going to do, if he's going to be a little bit of a liability because against bigger bodies, he's not going to hold up as well. So now you're talking maybe first and second down. You don't love using him. And now you have a guy who's just playing on third down, and he's this really interesting sort of chess piece, and you can use him off the edge, and that is a premium position. There's nothing more important defensively than impacting opposing passers. I could understand it. Tough sell at 4. His teammate, Mykel Williams, that to me makes a little bit more sense because you're talking 6'5", 34-inch arms, 260 pounds, dealt with an ankle injury that apparently is something that he's still dealing with. Georgia just recently held another sort of mini pro day for its guys lately, and apparently it didn't go real well for Mykel Williams, and apparently the ankle is still an issue. So that might scare you. But the length and the frame, and he is young, to me, somebody to be able to earn while still injured, and he got injured early last season, make second team All-SEC at that position, it's pretty damn impressive. And by the way, high-end high-end intangibles as well, according to the people at the Georgia program. That's a fit for Mike Vrabel's defense, really for any defense. And he's going to be versatile in a way that Walker isn't, in terms of you're using him on the edge and then maybe you're kicking him inside on obvious passing downs and you're allowing him to use his length against some guards, maybe playing him at 3 technique, the way they could with Trey Flowers back in the day. You know, he's got some positional versatility in that way. You're probably not going to want to see him dropping in coverage or spying quarterbacks the way you would with Jalen Walker. Third name on the edge, and we'll leave you with this one before we get to Albert Breer. Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. Fascinating player. 20 years old on draft night. One of the youngest players in the draft. And to me, one of the most promising. 285 pounds last year for Texas A&M. Thickly built, relentless energy, high motor. Really talented player on a really talented front for Texas A&M. Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, Nick Scorton. How did they let anyone score? That I don't know. They should have been much better defensively. They should have been setting records with the kind of talent they had up front with that defense. Be that as it may. 285. And now he's already dropped 20, 25 pounds. And he's in the 260-pound range at 6'3". And he's looking much more like the player he was 2 years ago at Purdue when he had 10 sacks and he led the Big Ten in sacks as a 19-year-old. If that's closer to the player he is at the NFL level, where he's this trimmer, more athletic, bendier option who has more pass rush ability than what he was really able to show last season at Texas A&M, there's a ton of value there. And maybe, just maybe, had he stayed at Purdue and had he stayed at 260, 255 pounds at 6'3", maybe you're talking about a 12 or 13 sack season. Maybe you're talking about a first-round pick. So maybe him transferring, gaining weight to fit better with that Texas A&M defense and what they wanted him to do, maybe that makes him a steal for someone, Patriots included. So at 38 overall, that's somebody that I might be interested in if I'm Mike Vrabel. If I really want to add and have that premium position be a little bit deeper behind Keon White or right there with Keon White, right there with Harold Landry, who's not going to be there forever. That's a name that I could certainly see the Patriots dipping into, and he did have a pre-draft 30 visit to Foxborough. So a name worth keeping an eye on. All right, there are your best fits at receiver, at pass rusher, defensive end, edge rusher, whatever you want to call it, outside linebacker. Both of those on NBCSportsBoston.com. Make sure you go and you check them out. We're going to have our final mock draft. That's going to include picks 1 through 32 on Wednesday. We're also going to have a full 7-round Patriots-specific mock draft. So I'll give you the pick at 4. You might be able to guess who it is. I'll give you the pick at 4 in our first-round mock, and then we're going to go with all 9 picks. We're going to mix it up a little bit, especially in the later rounds. Some interesting names that I think are worthy of note. So keep an eye out for that as well on NBCSportsBoston.com. John Sewer and Drain Cleaning is the name to know when the drains don't flow. Leave your drain pain to the experts. John Sewer's on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They do the dirty jobs, so you don't have to. Visit their website today at johnsewer.com. John Sewer, they get the job done. Let's get to our conversation right now with the great Albert Breer. Live and in person and in studio. It's going to be a lot of fun. Have a listen. All right, there he is, Albert Breer, our good friend from Sports Illustrated. Bert,
yep,
just hours away, it feels like, from the draft practically. Less than 24, about 24, whenever this thing comes out.
Yep.
What's going to happen at 4 overall?
I always think this time of year, I got all this information rattling around my head that's going to be worthless in a week.
That's what makes this time of year great, though,
yeah,
Bert. It's just
I know.
It is. It's like drinking through a fire hose for a few weeks, and then suddenly it's over.
Yep.
And it means nothing.
Yep. And then the guys are on teams, and all of a sudden, it's weird. There's this psychological thing where it's they almost become worse when they get on teams. We talk about them so optimistically, and then oh, wait a minute, he was a 4th-round pick. Those guys usually don't make it. You know what I mean?
Yep. That's especially going to happen this year. I feel like where it's not as talent laden a draft as maybe some others.
I mean, my guess would be as chalk through the first 4 picks. So I think, obviously we know it's Cam Ward, number 1 to Tennessee, then probably Travis Hunter, number 2 to Cleveland. I think the Giants swallow hard and take Abdul Carter at 3, and then I think it's Will Campbell at 4. And to me, like, things kind of get jumbled up at 5, where I think the outcomes could surprise some people. And I'm not quite sure the way it goes, but I went into this week. It's interesting. It's an interesting year this way. Like, I went into the week feeling like I had a pretty good handle on like the first like 9 or 10 picks, and the more I've talked to people, the more it's like I was wrong earlier in the week. So, I think it's going to be that's the one thing about this draft is like what it lacks in quality. I think it's going to have an unpredictability and drama, because after you get past the first, really the first 2 non-quarterbacks, the class flattens out a bunch.
Any chance the Patriots could be involved in any of that drama, i.e., maybe a trade down? I think from the beginning we've looked at this draft outside of those 2 non-quarterbacks at the top, and we've said, boy, if they're just in such a bad spot where they're at the top of a second tier of players, right? So if they could move back, I think in an ideal world, that's what they would do and still get a good player. Mm-hmm. But is there going to be that opportunity for them?
I think if something or someone prompts a big move up, it could be Ashton Genty. Just because I think teams look at him a little bit different, and like he is above the pack, but the question is the position he plays. And, I think, for some of these teams, when you look at it, and I think this is going to come into play with some of the teams in the top 10 with Genty, if he's sitting there for him, is like, okay, so if you're looking at, Will Campbell, what is he, the 12th, 14th best tackle in the league at his peak, like if everything works.
A good starter.
Same thing with Membu, right? Like, and, if you're drafting Jalen Walker, is he really going to be like a game-changing pass rusher, where you look at Genty and it's like maybe he can be one of the best 2 or 3 backs in football. And so, I think the opportunity to get a premier player at a position that can have a pretty big impact, even if its value has been knocked down a little bit by, I think, the fact that you can make it work with lesser players at that position, and because of the shelf life, somebody could come up. And I think Denver's the one that I have circled right now that could be a Genty team coming up. But that'd be a big move up. You know what I mean? So like,
and
how
it's
much
a significant move down for our listeners that are thinking from a Patriots perspective.
Yeah, now you're out of the
going to
range.
go all the way down to 20, I think is where the Broncos are.
Yeah. And so then, like, are you willing to? I mean, you're out of the first tier of the tackles then easily. Like, you're not. I mean, we've been talking about Campbell and Membu and Banks, like that's off the table.
Long gone.
And now we're talking about Josh Connerly and Josh Simmons and those guys. So, I think Genty's the one that could provoke some movement. And I do think one thing that could help them, if they're looking to move down a couple of spots, if there is another team in the top 10 that's eyeing up Genty, the more I've talked to people, the more Jacksonville's going offensive skill at 5. And I like, in my mind, I think it could be one of 2 guys. I think it's Tet McMillan, which would be a real curveball, but Ashton Genty is the other. And so, I think at least the perception being out there that Genty could go 5th overall to Jacksonville could add some value to the Patriots pick.
Which would be really interesting. If they can somehow stay in the top 10 and move back, that to me is somewhat ideal in that you're still in the mix for one of those top 3 tackles. And I've heard from people with the team that there's it's love for all 3 guys. And I'm with you. I think ultimately it'll be Will Campbell if they stick at 4 and they pick there. But, the athleticism of Membu is really intriguing, and the combination of the experience at left tackle and the good enough athleticism and the play style and demeanor of Kelvin Banks. I had a scout the other day tell me, man, because we're always talking about Campbell and his football character.
And Banks is great.
Banks is really, really high end. And the scout said, I want my kids to be like Kelvin Banks when they grow up. Like, it's just like, it's some of that over-the-top high-end praise that you get for certain guys in a draft, every single year. But he's in that group.
I don't think there's a huge separation between the three of them. And again, I'm not like scouting offensive linemen. It's based on what I've heard just talking to people. But kind of the consensus I get is like, Campbell's the most pro ready. Membu's the one like where you're projecting a bunch, right? Like, but he's got a really high ceiling, and Banks is a little bit in the middle, where Banks has the requisite, the measurables, and with Membu, like you have the measurables, but you don't have the production. With Campbell, you have the production, but not the measurables.
Right.
As we've talked over the last couple of weeks, Phil, like you and I on shows and stuff, I feel like we've sort of zeroed in on Campbell and Membu. And the more I've talked to teams over, I'd say the last 10 days, like Banks is probably going to go in the top 10 also, and I think he's right there with some teams. And the cool thing about it is all three of these guys were born, and this is going to make us both feel old, 2004. So they're all 21 years old. And not only are they 21 years old, they just turned 21. So you're talking about three guys where I think to some degree, you look at that age and that does matter to teams versus I think Grace Zabel's 23. We've talked about Tyler Warren. I believe he's 24. It's easy to look, especially at a position where like playing strength is so important.
Totally.
Like where a guy like 2-3 years from now could be a little bit of a different player than he is right now.
No question about it. And that makes, in some ways it makes all three guys, I think you could be a little bit more optimistic in terms of their projection. Like Membu, I've been told, like athletically, there's nothing the guy can't do.
Yeah.
And, some of the drawbacks for him are obviously he hasn't played left tackle, so you are projecting there, but he's such a great athlete. I've heard from evaluators just say, like, athletically, he can do it.
Yeah.
It's just, I think for some, it's a question of, first of all, it's been interesting.
Yeah.
There are some teams that have him as a possible guard convert. The same way, we've been talking about Campbell for a long. Well, maybe he ends up being a guard. There are teams that look at Membu similarly. He's 6'4". He's not as tall as Campbell, so I think maybe the frame is part of that. I think his demeanor in terms of on the field he's not as, a little inconsistent.
The character's not quite what. Like I think Campbell and Banks, you don't worry about that at all.
Yeah.
Like Membu's not bad character, but I think there's like a little immaturity and a little growing up he needs to do, which is a little different than like Banks and Campbell for guys who are just 21 are pretty grown up.
And even for Membu, I think, he's a little later to football. Mm-hmm. He started in high school, so he wasn't like, Will Campbell has talked about, being 5 years old and playing tackle football with the high schoolers who live across the street from him because that's what his dad wanted him to do. So like he's just one of these, football, born and bred, farm raised,
in Massachusetts.
Exactly, So it's just a little different. Whereas Membu, played instruments and played soccer, and his parents are from Cameroon, and so they're just not. They haven't been as a family around football as much as some of these other guys and their families have. So it's just a little bit of an interesting wiring there that's just different. Doesn't make it bad. Mm-hmm. You've talked often about, I just want to put the tackles aside because I feel like we talked a lot about tackle, and we think that's the way they'll go. However, let's talk some wild cards here. Mm-hmm. You've consistently brought up Jalen Walker as a fit for the Patriots. Yep. Why is that? And do you think there's a chance that he ends up getting his name called in the top 5 by New England?
Yeah, I think, if they had real misgivings, I think one of the things, and John Spytek, the new Raiders general manager, did a nice job of explaining this. I think it was during his press conference where he was talking about how, you have to look at the draft as just not one, like the draft's like a big mosaic, and how it all comes together, and how these teams look at it is, okay, like, well, if we go tight end here and tackle there, is the tackle going to be there? And if he's not, then we go tackle here and tight end there instead. I think that's sort of the way you have to look at these things. And I think if like they felt like there was going to be a great tackle option available for them, I think they're 35. Is that right?
The Patriots are 38 in the second round.
38 in the second round. Okay. So 38 in the second. So if you thought there was going to be like a man, like that's a guy like we can start right away at left tackle, and maybe he'll be the long-term answer. Maybe we got to put him somewhere else. Then I think you would look at it, you would seriously consider it more. I think the problem is, and this is one of the reasons why I think there could be some movement for the offensive lineman late in the round too. The well does run dry a little bit. Like there's the first 5 and then there's a drop off. So the first 3, then the next 2, then there's a drop off. Same thing with the interior offensive linemen. There are 5 of them, and then there's a drop off. So you have 10 guys who are either first round or fringe first round, and then there's a different level of player after that. So I think that's really where like it's a little more difficult for the Patriots to do it because they need an answer at tackle. However, I think if you want to talk about like football makeup, like Jalen Walker is off the charts, and Georgia's really good in this area this year. Like the Georgia players, Malachi Starks, Mikael Williams are both really good too. But Walker's the one where when you talk to teams, it's like he's the son of a coach, and you get him in the room and he's like a defensive coordinator, and it looks like he's gonna be ready to play right away. I like some of the stuff you hear about from the meetings. It's just like this guy's going to be a captain in 2 or 3 years somewhere, And so I think that obviously fits what they're looking for. And then I think like if you look at Tennessee and what Mike Vrabel was looking for, I think the one overriding thing about the players in the front seven is he wanted disruptors.
Violent.
Violent disruptors. Like Jeffrey Simmons was that. Harold Landry was a disruptive player. Even like some guys in the secondary, like Byard was that way when he was at his best, I think the whole idea was to have guys that were disruptive. And if you watch Jalen Walker, you can be creative with him. You can move him around. You have to have a plan for him. So that's the thing. It's like you're probably not going to just sit him on the edge and just that's going to be his job. But he is. I think he does fit that profile of a very disruptive player. I'm not I'm not a scout, but I try to watch like a little bit of these guys, like I'm sure you do too. And I'd say he's like one of the most fun players to watch in the draft. You know what I mean?
He just looks like he's shot out of a cannon when he's pursuing the ball.
Yeah.
He to me, I think one of the biggest reasons you would draft him if you're the Patriots is I don't know if they would have a better quarterback spy option than Jalen Walker, and you face Josh Allen twice a year. You know what I mean? He just looks like he is that kind of athletic in the open field. It's such a good tackler. He's like very fundamentally sound. He's not the biggest guy in the world. You're right. He's 6'1", 240-ish. So can he live on the edge for all 3 downs? I've talked to people who feel like maybe not.
Probably not. So you have to move him around a bunch. You have to have a plan for him. But I think he's part of this like new genre of player, which is I think the reason Micah Parsons, there were some off-field stuff too, but one of the reasons Micah Parsons fell out of the top 10 in 2021 was, well, what do you do with him? You know what I mean? He's good off the line. He's good on the line, but he's only 6'3". He's not like, generally the guy that you draft at, as an edge player at in the top 5, like generally that guy's 6'5" and 270. Like, are you really going to do this with this play? And the Cowboys, and Dan Quinn deserves credit for this. Like they had a plan and they came up with a plan and they made it work. And you can see like he's really great at doing both. And you have to have a plan. There are a bunch of players like that now. You know what I mean? And it's almost like he launched like this genre of player to some degree. At least people were doing it in a more dedicated way where, like that's what Jalen Walker was. That's what Abdul Carter to some degree was at Penn State. That's what Jahad Campbell was to some degree at Alabama. I think like I'm not saying he's going to be Micah Parsons as a pro, but I think like that's sort of your vision is like, doing, and maybe a little less so, like they kind of Dallas parked Parsons on the edge more consistently last year under Mike Zimmer, but like kind of what Dan Quinn was doing with him where they were moving him around the bunch. They were blitzing him in the A gap. Like, I think that's the sort of thing that's the sort of plan that you want for Jalen Walker's where you're using him almost as like a defensive joker.
Yeah. It's like the perfect fit for him would be a Brian Flores defense.
Yeah.
Where they just are walking guys around all over the place. And actually one of the comps I got for Jalen Walker was Andrew Van Ginkel.
Yeah.
Right? So like, and it's a funny name to say, first of all. So it's like, I always love talking about him whenever I get the opportunity to. And he's a good player, but he's not Micah Parsons, right? He's not Myles Garrett. He's not, but you can use him in a variety of different ways and he's really valuable. The question is, as it is with Campbell and his measurements, it's like, is that really what you're going to do in the top 5?
Doesn't it feel like everyone, I don't feel like there's anyone where you like in the top 10 this year where you're not asking that question outside of maybe Hunter and Carter, and even with them there are questions.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
no, totally.
Carter's not traditional size for an edge player either. Hunter, like it's like, okay, like and I love Travis Hunter, don't get me wrong, but it's like you have to have a plan for him too, and it's okay, like, his comps are Devontae Smith, Garrett Wilson, Steph Diggs. Like, that's not Jamar Chase, which is typically what you would get at like a 2nd or 3rd overall pick. And the comp I've heard on defense for him is Darius Slay. So you have to have a plan for him too. So I feel like it's sort of one of the marks of this draft is like you don't have a lot of guys that like check every box when you're talking about a prototype, which means with every one of them, you're going to have to compromise somewhere.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, if we assume they go offensive line in the first round, is there going to be the same kind of drop-off there was a year ago at receiver, where there was this big run on receivers late in the first round and then early in the second? Remember the Patriots, they traded out. They gave up the pick that actually was used on Ladd McConkey, and then they end up drafting Jalen Polk. Should they be really eyeing receivers at 38
Yeah.
in your opinion? Do you think they can wait and still get somebody who's really going to contribute? Because to me, the theme for this draft, I think we're probably going to be coming away from it saying, boy, look at how they've invested in Drake May by the people they're trying to surround him with. And it's clear they need to do that. So should they force the issue to some degree at receiver and take a guy there at 38?
I don't know if you have to force it, though. It's funny. You hear, and it's right. It's correct that like this isn't a great year relative from like in a relative sense versus other years
for
receivers.
wideouts.
Yeah, like it's just not what it has been the last few years. But that bar is really freaking high, and I think it's because like it's just the makeup of the sport now because of 7-on-7 and what's become of football. Like guys who when we were growing up would have played running back are playing receiver now. Guys who would have played DB when we were growing up are playing receiver now. There's so many great athletes that have gravitated towards that position. If you look at like the recruiting rankings, right? I mean, this might be an exaggeration, but I think if you looked at like top 150 players in America, high school players, there's probably 30 receivers there. Wow. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so I'm saying that because every year is a great receiver year. It's felt like of late. So this isn't a great receiver year relative to what we've seen, but there's still good players at the position, So like, is there an Amon-Ra St. Brown who I think Detroit dug out of the 4th round somewhere? Potentially. Like the Higgins kid from Iowa State. Like I think he's got potential. Kyle Williams from Washington State. Like there are, I think at that position, there are more opportunities to get better players late than there ever has been. And just because this year's class isn't as good at the top doesn't mean there aren't chances to fill that position out. I still think there are really good players there. It's just going to be on your scouts to dig them out and figure out which ones they are, and then when the right time to take them is.
You mentioned a couple interesting names there, in Higgins and Williams. Are whether it's those two or somebody else, anybody who's generating a lot of buzz as being like an early second, and hey, don't be surprised if this guy sneaks into the first kind of receiver? Because those are names that we've heard. Higgins is interesting because he's got some size. He's 6'4" and ran a 4.47. His teammate Jalen Knoll is another player that we've talked about quite a bit on Early Edition and some of our other shows here. Any receiver names that have generated some chatter?
I don't know. I mean, I think the bottom of the first round, I think you're going to see like all the linemen go. You know what I mean? Like I just think because of the dynamic I talked about before, it's going to be hard, for a receiver to kind of slide in there. And I think like offensive line, defensive line, you're going to see those guys, maybe some corners. Like I've heard the Florida State kid, Azariah Thomas, as one that could sneak in the bottom of the first round despite having run a 4.6.
Yeah, he ran really slow
which is
in the
crazy.
40, but he's supposedly a great man corner.
And maybe a fit for Buffalo. Does somebody take a chance on Ravel from East Carolina, who's got the ACL? So I don't know if there's one that'll sneak into the bottom of the first round, but certainly Higgins is one that's gotten a lot of attention. And people like that I respect have said that's like a really solid second round pick for somebody. So, again, like I think the difference this year is you don't have the volume at the position that you've had, where you have these years and it's like, I can see 30 of them going in the first 3 rounds, whatever, like whatever the crazy number is. You don't have the volume, but I think you do have opportunities with guys like that. Like Williams is a great runner after the catch guy. Like he sort of strikes me as somebody that Josh would like, so I think there's some opportunity there. And then tight end, there's great depth, Warren and Loveland are really good. There's some argument over which one's the best, by the way, of those two, which I was a little surprised by. The last couple of weeks, I got some people who are really Loveland people over Warren.
Hey, given what Brock Bowers did last year, if you look at these two guys this year and you say which one's more like Brock Bowers, you'd probably say Loveland.
Yeah, Loveland is like, so, I had a GM last night I was talking to who said, Loveland's the route runner, and then Bowers is sort of, Warren is sort of the Swiss Army knife, like sort of the difference between the two of them. But then you go on down the line. Mason Taylor is rock solid from LSU. Harold Fannin from Bowling Green was ultra productive. Elijah Arroyo has had injuries, but, I think he impressed a lot of people at the Senior Bowl. So, I think there's some opportunity to improve that position too. I know it's one the Patriots are a little older at. So like, if you're them, do you say, okay, like we can dig in the 3rd round, get a really good player here. They sit behind Henry and Hooper for a year, and then boom, in 2026 they're ready to roll. I think because it is year one, you're gonna have opportunity to do some things like that under Mike Vrabel.
Definitely. Albert Breer, thanks so much for being with us on Next Pats. This is always great. Every year around this time, we get to pick your brain. It is overloaded with information, and as you said, 2 weeks from now, how useful will it be? I don't know, but it's up there. It's in there, and it's rattling around.
It's going to be one of these. Like we're talking about guys now that are going to be running with like the fourth team in a month. So.
Yeah, but you'll be able to say,
I know who he is.
You know that guy,
I've heard
where
about
his
him.
family's from, and what concerns they had about using him in a 3-4 versus a 4-3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. It's all valuable information to us, Bert. So thank you for sharing with us today. Great stuff there, as always, from Bert. Very busy man this time of year. We appreciate him taking the time. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to the Next Pats podcast, for following all of our coverage as we build up to Thursday night. This is my favorite time of year. Hopefully it's one of your favorite times of year as well. And again, as we mentioned earlier, pretty damn important for the New England Patriots to get it right. Not only at number 4, but at 38, 2 picks in the third round. This is their opportunity in Mike Vrabel's first draft as head coach of New England to get it right and build a core that's going to grow with him here in Foxborough for a long time moving forward. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for watching. If you are watching on YouTube, again, hit us with your mock drafts in the comments section. Going to try to mix it up there as much as humanly possible. We appreciate you so much. Make sure you're watching all of our coverage on NBC Sports Boston. We are going to be live on the air 6 to 7, as we always are on Thursday night for early edition. We're going to be live on the air 7 to 10 for our On the Clock special. 10 to 11, we've got Boston Sports Tonight. Guess what? We'll be there too. And we're going to have all kinds of coverage, all kinds of sound, all kinds of highlights for whichever draft pick they end up going with at 4, or maybe somewhere else. Or hell, maybe it's 2 draft picks, guys. Maybe they trade back into the first round after taking one certain position at 4, and then they feel like they've got to force the issue at the bottom of the first. Who knows? We're going to be there for it all. Hours and hours of coverage on Thursday. We're going to be online and on TV as well, again, for our On the Clock special on Friday night, so don't miss that. Just keep it locked on NBC Sports Boston. We will have you covered. I promise. We'll talk to you then.